Welcome to the Only Words podcast, where poets and poetry lovers talk about the role of the art in their lives and the modern world. Joining us on this episode is
Kimberly, aka at Hibiscus, spelled Hibiskos, on Threads and Instagram. I've always wanted to be a writer. I've been a literal closet writer most of my life. My office is an actual closet I made into a room of her own, my own. Shout out to Virginia Woolf. I'm actually quite the introvert. I have a BA in English Creative Writing, an MA in Teaching English Language Arts. I have a specialist degree in curriculum and instruction, and I'm ABD in a doctoral program. I've taught high school English for 13 years. So yeah, I've done a lot of writing, but I love it. It's just been my lifelong passion. I'm not a published poet other than the coveted acceptance of one of my poems in my university's literary magazine. Other than that, maybe one day, perhaps.
When did you discover or were introduced to poetry?
I have been a lifelong reader. However, I believe I really started to enjoy writing poetry in high school.
Do you recall the first poem that really moved you? How did it affect you?
Emily Dickinson, because I could not stop for death. I recall being mesmerized by the topic of death, the meter, the rhyme, and I have been in love with her and her poetry ever since.
When did you start writing poetry, and what prompted that?
I've always been in love with writing and words. The poetry started because of young love, or rather infatuation, with the boy who sat in front of me in class when I was 14 or 15 years old, I believe. I still have all my poems from that year. I really like rereading them. Like, they're hilarious to me. So I revisit them from time to time.
What does it mean to you to be a poet?
Writing poetry has always been my go-to when trying to just be myself. Like, I like to play with words. I feel most like myself when writing poetry. Like I'm tapping into a different part of me that I can't access otherwise, if that makes sense.
What do you love most about poetry?
I love practically everything about poetry. I think it's fun. I could answer this question all day, honestly. We would need a whole nother segment for this. But to me, it's just a beautiful and pure artistic expression. Just unlike other forms of writing, poetry just provides me freedom. I may write a sonnet one day, the next day I might write in stream of consciousness. I don't necessarily have to worry about plot structure or anything like that. It's, a day-to-day thing, and it's exciting when you wake up and think, oh, what am I going to write about today? Instead of, oh, what am I editing today?
What do you think poetry can do that other forms of literature perhaps cannot accomplish at all, or just not as well?
I believe poetry helps us develop like a higher level of understanding language because of its figurative qualities. Some poems can be interpreted in many ways, from different angles. It's like sort of like a brain teaser to me. I can reread a poem and like find something new with each reading, and that's quite delightful. And I really like the musical qualities in some really good poetry.
In your opinion, what makes a poem successful?
In my opinion, I feel it's successful when I have coherently expressed my initial idea or thought, that it turned out the way I envisioned it would. Sometimes I have an idea, but it's difficult to like execute it into words the way it is in my mind. Sometimes it even surprises me and turns out better than I could have imagined, which is always a treat.
Do you have a favorite poet? If so, what is it about their work that you love?
I would have to say a shout out to the bard, Shakespeare. My students used to find my obsession funny, but they enjoyed my enthusiasm. I had in my classroom an entire bookshelf dedicated to Shakespearean plays, books, and other artifacts. Like, I even had a Shakespeare plush doll. I like to say I'm just a sucker for iambic pentameter.
What would you say to someone who says they don't like poetry or has never read poetry?
I encountered this many times as a teacher. Whenever I had a student tell me they didn't like poetry, I would reply, "Do you like music?" And of course they did. So then we would talk about it. For many years, my students would engage in a poetry project that I designed myself, like early on in my career. After teaching them as much as I could about poetry, they would choose one of their favorite songs and dissect it based on its poetic qualities. And then they would present the song and their findings to the class. And they really actually liked it. And I think they learned a lot that way, both about music and poetry.
You enjoy poetry, but do you think poetry matters in the modern world? What can it offer the average person?
It matters because it's heart and soul of language, and it's heart and soul of people, and it's emotional, and it connects us to one another.
How do you approach writing poetry? Or do they simply come to you?
For threads, I just write on the fly. That's what I put on there because I just want some freedom. I had been writing poetry for many years, but it was like very sporadic. I always felt like I needed to find time to do it, which was difficult because of college, my career, being a mom to 4 kids. And I had always wanted to write a poem a day or just write more often, but I just never got into the habit of it because there were so many things just getting in the way. So I told myself I would just write and not worry about it being perfect and just press post. So I basically just sit down in the morning with a cup of coffee, like as soon as I wake up practically. And I go through my pictures and find one that just speaks to me, and I just let my mind be free. And it's a good feeling. And I know that I can edit them later if I ever find the time.
Do you write with a reader in mind? If so, is that reader someone you know or a composite?
I honestly write for myself because I know I can't please everybody, and I don't want to worry about like it appealing to a certain audience, because I feel like that might be a limitation. And so I write things that I believe are helpful, entertaining, or inspiring to me. And hopefully they are helpful, entertaining, or inspiring to someone else. One poem might appeal to one audience or person, while another poem might appeal to a completely different audience or person. So I just like having options. I don't know if that's the best word. I like the freedom of not having to appeal to a certain person or people.
What would you do if you couldn't write poetry?
I'm not a professional poet, although I would love to be one. But being an English teacher is definitely the next best thing, because I get to talk about writing and literature and language all day long. So, and being a teacher definitely makes one a better writer.
Where can listeners go to find your work or learn more about you?
Just visit my threads. I also have an Instagram. Instagram definitely has a lot more information about my life and my current journey. But Threads seems to have more of my poetry. But my username is @hibiscus, HIBISKOS.
Thank you for listening to Only Words. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review, check out other episodes, share this podcast with anyone you think may enjoy it, and most of all, please do join us again next month for another conversation about poetry. Until then, live compassionately, love always, and read more poetry.